Hi, Mrs. Greathouse here. We're going to finish up Chapter 8 today. We're going to talk about the discrepancy of number of ATP in cellular respiration and fermentation. Okay, we've been talking about cellular respiration. You know that 2 ATP are made in glycolysis, 2 ATP are made in the citric acid cycle, and then when we brought in the electron transport chain, we said it was 32 to 34 ATP are made there. Today I want to explain to you that range of 2. There are 4 reasons for that range of 2. The electron transport chain needs 10 NADH. These NADH come from glycolysis, prep reactions, and the citric acid cycle. We have to remember that the NADH that was made in glycolysis is in the cytoplasm. It needs to travel all the way into the mitochondria to participate in the electron transport chain. That transporting right there is going to use some ATP. Reason number 2. Phosphorylation, when we put that last phosphate on ADP, and reduction are not directly coupled. For every NAD that is used, it is not exactly 1 ATP that can be made. That ratio is not a whole number, and that is because the exact number of hydrogen ions that re-enter the mitochondria to make 1 ATP through ATP synthase is debated. Reason number 3. Different types of tissue have different inputs to the electron transport chain. Therefore, we're going to get some different outputs. We know that if we're using NAD plus, we're going to get 3 ATP. If we use FAD, we only get 2 ATP. Different tissues have different concentrations of these coenzymes. For example, in the brain, FAD is more abundant. In the liver and heart, it's the NAD plus that is more abundant. So that makes a difference from tissue to tissue or cell to cell, how much ATP is being made. Reason number 4, the proton motive force. It is true that all of those hydrogen ions that are on the intermembrane of the mitochondria, they all may not be used to drive ATP generation. Some of those may be used for different processes in the cell. So now that we're through cellular respiration, we have made ATP. That ATP is available to do work for the cell. When that happens, the ATP breaks down to ADP and a phosphate group. We've talked about dark meat and light meat before. I think we related it to a chicken and a duck, but since we're close to Thanksgiving, let's talk about the turkey. Okay, if you think about your turkey, the breast is white meat, the legs are dark meat. When we talked about organelles, we said the dark meat was dark because it had more mitochondria there. If we think about how a turkey moves, he doesn't fly very much. He runs, he walks. So he's using more ATP to contract the muscles in his legs versus his breast. Okay, therefore, the dark meat has more mitochondria to produce more ATP. This is an adaptation for turkeys because they run. What about rigor mortis? Have you heard of rigor mortis? This is the hardening and stiffening of the body 3 to 4 hours after death. Okay, muscles need ATP to relax. Okay, when death occurs, no more ATP is being produced. Therefore, the muscle fibers are going to contract or remain contracted and stiff. Okay, here we go into fermentation. Fermentation occurs when an organism has limited oxygen. When did oxygen come into the picture in our cellular respiration equation? Not till the end, right? It doesn't come in until the electron transport chain. It's our final electron acceptor. It will take 2 electrons and 2 hydrogen atoms and form water. Okay, so if an organism is short on oxygen, there's nothing to accept those 2 electrons, which means that NADH won't be able to return to its NAD plus form that is needed in glycolysis. If we don't have that NAD plus, then glycolysis stops. Okay, this is where fermentation comes in. Fermentation is what we call an anaerobic pathway. Anaerobic means absence of oxygen. The process of fermentation will provide rapid bursts of ATP to get an organism through this oxygen debt. Okay, it's going to provide NAD for glycolysis. What's going to happen chemically is NAD is going to combine with pyruvate to yield the NAD+. So NAD reduces pyruvate and results in NAD+. NAD+ is now available to pick up more electrons earlier in glycolysis reactions. We have some wonderful products that come from fermentation. When yeast are in fermentation, their products are ethanol and carbon dioxide. We use yeast to make bread. It helps the bread rise. The yeast is in the dough. As that carbon dioxide is given off as a product, it makes bubbles and makes the bread rise. This also accounts for the holes that we see in the bread. If we put yeast with grapes, we make wine. If we put yeast with hops and barley, the product is beer. Okay, animals and some bacteria produce lactate as their product through fermentation. With the use of bacteria, our wonderful products of fermentation include cheese, yogurt, and sauerkraut. Okay, a not so wonderful product of fermentation is lactic acid that accumulates in our muscles. Have you ever been doing this great aerobic workout and it's getting to the end and you start feeling these cramps in your legs? That's the lactic acid building up. You need to stop and replenish your oxygen and then continue. Okay, even if you're sore the next day after a workout, that soreness in your muscles is caused by the lactic acid that accumulates because you were working out with not enough oxygen. Okay, so when the oxygen is restored, when the oxygen debt is reduced, lactate is broken down to acetyl-CoA and is then metabolized. Fermentation is not very efficient. It's only 2.1% efficient compared to the cellular respiration being 39% efficient. Here's your inputs and your outputs. We are going to put in 1 glucose. That's going to be converted to pyruvate, depending on if you're an animal or a bacteria, or if you're a yeast, your outputs are different. Lactate for animals and bacteria, yeast, your product's going to be ethanol and carbon dioxide. Okay, we also have to put in 2 ADP, 2 phosphate groups to make only 2 ATP. NAD is converted to NADH, and then that is converted back to NAD, so it can go back into glycolysis and fermentation can continue until oxygen is restored. Okay, metabolic pool. This discussion revolves around all the things that ATP can be used to break down molecules or build them up. This revolves around what is coming into our body as food and how it changes. Okay, the metabolic pool can break down things, which is usually an exergonic reaction. This is called catabolism. We know that glucose is broken down in cellular respiration. When that glucose is all used up, our bodies can take fat and break that down into its glycerol and 3 fatty acids. These fatty acids can be converted to acetyl-CoA, and when that goes through cellular respiration, an 18 carbon fatty acid can produce 108 ATP. So when we are burning fat, we are getting a lot more ATP, 3 times more at least ATP than when we burn a glucose. Okay, what about amino acids? Okay, you've got your basic amino acid structure here. Okay, what can happen with an amino acid, and this happens in the starvation process, the deamination occurs, so this amino group is removed. Then what's left on the molecule, okay, this can enter glycolysis and be used as an energy source. Okay, the opposite of catabolism is anabolism. Anabolism are reactions that are going to build up molecules. This is an endergonic process. Okay, catabolism and anabolism are coupled reactions. The ATP that's given off in catabolism is going to be the ATP that goes into the anabolic reactions. In anabolism, carbohydrates, if our body does not use them, can be converted into fats. Okay, the G3P is converted to a glycerol. Acetyl groups that aren't used, they build the fatty acids. So we have our 1 glycerol, our 3 fatty acids, and we're going to make a triglyceride, which is stored as fat. This is how we gain weight when we eat too many sweets and too many fats. Our body isn't using them, and it's going to build the fat from the G3P and the acetyl groups. Amino acids can be converted into different amino acids with anabolism. Plants can make all the amino acids that they need. Animals, it's a little different. We can make 11 of the 20 amino acids on our own. These are called the non-essential amino acids. The 9 essential amino acids we need to take in through our diet. There's a great diagram of the metabolic pool in your book on page 144. It's figure 8.12. Okay, so that wraps up our discussion for today. You need to make sure that you can answer these 4 questions. Bring all of your questions to class tomorrow, and we will review and get those questions answered. Have a great day.